Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video we are going to make a different size card than we've been making. We're going to make a slimline card today. So I have this Pinkfresh Painted Daisy stamp, die, and stencil bundle. That's what we're going to be using for our focal image today. There are 6 stencils in this set and we will be using all 6 to color in this image. My color inspiration comes from the Color Cube Volume 1. This is card 173. I used this Momenta slimline die set, slimline layering die set to die cut the second largest, and it creates a scallop edge around the edge. I have just a regular white slimline card base. This measures 8.5 by 7, and then I folded it in half at 3.5. The colors I'm using are all from Simon Says Stamp. This is Sprout and Field, and then I'm using Rose Apple, Watermelon, Merlot, and Soft Blue. These are from their regular line, not their Pawsitively Saturated line. I'm going to use my blending brushes that I purchased from Amazon to color that in. But first I'm going to go ahead and stamp this image. I've already got it placed into my stamping positioning tool, and I am going to ink this up with Versafine Onyx Black ink. This is my preferred ink just because it is so dark, black, and rich. The only issue that I have is that it stays wet because it is a pigment ink. It stays wet a little bit longer, and so you do run the risk of smearing it. I'm going to stamp this in this corner, and then I'm going to end up flipping it, and realized that I wanted this more toward the center. It was off too far to the side. It wasn't covering enough of this die cut, so I do end up flipping this and repositioning it a little further down, just so I can get more images to color. When I am done stamping this, I will actually zap it really quickly with my heat tool, just to make sure that I don't smear it or these light colors turn kind of gray and muddy because the ink was not dry. So I'm just gonna, as you see, I flipped it and I'm going to ink this up one more time. I ink it up really good, and then I will go ahead and stamp that down and then zap it with my heat tool. We're going to move on to the stenciling. I have positioned this first stencil. This is the light purple. So in the actual packaging for this stamp die and stencil bundle, they have a color printed version of it on the back. And I use that as kind of the template to figure out what colors I wanted where. And so for this light purple on the template, I'm using Rose Apple Simon Says Stamp ink to ink blend this layer. This is kind of the most, this color's in the most of these petals on these daisies. So I'm just going to ink that up, then flip the stencil and ink up the other side. I do a very light layer of this one just to kind of begin with, and then I do the same thing on the other side. So this is the first stencil, or the light purple layer on the stamp packaging, and I'm inking this up in Rose Apple, and then we will move on to the second layer and the second stencil. This is the second layer, or the medium shade of purple on the packaging, and for me, I am coloring this in with Watermelon from Simon Says Stamp. Same kind of process. I'm just ink blending this over, and then I will flip it to the other side and ink blend that. The centers of these flowers are kind of connected by this little stencil nubbin, for lack of better words. That can catch on your blending tool, so just be kind of wary of that. I didn't have any problems using these ink blending brushes, but if you're using like a foam pad, you might catch that. So that's just something to be aware of. Moving on to the third layer, this is Merlot from Simon Says Stamp. This is very, very deep, rich, almost burgundy color. It looks and layers beautifully on here. And this has like the least amount of space on these flowers. It is more detailed there. Then after I've done that, I am moving on to the greenery, and this is the first layer of the greenery. This first layer of the greenery, I'm going to do in the Sprout. This is from the Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated line of inks. The other ones were from their normal line. This is from their Positively Saturated line. And I'm going to just repeat the same process. Ink blend the one side, flip it, ink blend the other. And this is the darkest green for the greenery and foliage. This is Field, also from Pinkfresh Positively Saturated. This ink pad was extremely juicy. I think I would have liked a little bit lighter application of this, but it's fine. It was just a very, very juicy ink pad, and I was not fully prepared for that. This is the sixth and final stencil, and this is the Surf ink from Simon Says Stamp. This is not their Positively Saturated line. I just wanted a little pop of a different color in the leaves and greenery of this flower, of this image, and so I went with this Surf ink. I thought it matched the color inspiration nicely and was just a different kind of color. So I did get a little bit of ink where I didn't want it. I'm taking a mono sand eraser, the actual sanding side of it, and just kind of scratching the surface of that away until it's gone. And then no one will know besides me and all of YouTube that there was ink where we didn't want it. And that is it all stenciled in. So I did take a piece of Paper Studio cardstock and just cut it down. So that card base is 3.5 by 8.5. I took a blue piece of cardstock that played with that Surf ink very nicely, and I just took 1/8 of an inch off of both sides, and then I will layer that on top. That was a layering label die set from Momenta, and this is a Hero Arts Togetherness Flower Bouquet. That is where I'm pulling my sentiment from. I chose to go ahead and heat emboss this sentiment. I'm going to do that in clear. You could absolutely do white. I'm going to actually end up ink blending over this label. I thought for a minute I would go ahead and do more of that kind of teal blue cardstock that was the layering backdrop for this card, but I decided that might be a little too distracting, a little too much. So I just treated this this die with my anti-static powder tool, and I'm going to ink this up in Versamark ink. I end up stamping it twice, and then I will pour over clear embossing powder and heat set with my heat tool. My heat tool is actually heating up off to the side. The longer you let your heat tool heat up, the less warping you get, and it just gives you a better image. So I just hit that with my heat tool until that became shiny and clear, no longer grainy. And now I'm going to use that same Surf Blue ink from Simon to just ink around this little label die cut here. Like I said, I toyed with the idea of doing doing some more of that Paper Studio blue cardstock. I just felt like that would be way too harsh and distracting. So I chose a color from my stash, and I'm just going to ink blend over this. This is a good way if you don't have a whole lot of colored cardstock, but you do have a decent selection of inks, to kind of get more out of your less expensive white cardstock. Another option, I even thought about maybe going direct to paper for a minute. I just really didn't want this to be very harsh and in your face. And so just ink blending over this really helped. I do try to buff off some of the ink that is resting on top of that embossed sentiment. It was still really dull looking. So I took a tip that I learned from Jennifer McGuire, and I reheated it. So I took my heat gun and I just really quickly, you're not trying to like add more powder or anything like that. You're just trying to reheat the embossing powder to bring back its luster, its shine. And I did go back and do that, and it helped a lot. So you see me here trying to buff it. It was still really dull. So I did do that little Jennifer McGuire trick and just reheat that, and that did bring back the shine. Now I'm going to go through and just adhere everything together. I'm just using some wet glue just to layer these all together. I do pick it up so that I can see a little bit better. You know, these eyes with astigmatism, everything looks straight, but it's actually kind of crooked. So I did pick it up and ensure that everything was straight. I did toy with the idea of popping this up on some foam tape for a minute, but I knew I was going to pop up the sentiment, and I thought that would be just a bit much. And so I opted just to adhere this flat. I did cut that label die from a scrap piece of cardstock, so there is some misstamping on the back of it, but no one will ever know it. No one will ever see it. I am taking Altenew Instant Dimension foam tape just to pop up this little label and sentiment from the card base a little bit, just to give it some distinction and a little more interest to the card. So I will adhere that kind of in this little nook right here. And then I'm going to embellish this card and it will be complete. So let's do the embellishing. These are some sequins I purchased off of Amazon. I thought they played with that teal colored cardstock very nicely. They came in two sizes, a smaller and a little bit bigger. And I just kind of adhered them around the sentiment in groups of three, just to kind of fill in some of that white space right there. I just really wanted to play off of the teal since that was not quite as noticeable in this card. This red really pops, but I wanted to kind of bring forth more of that teal just to kind of incorporate that some more. I did pair this with the Paper Studio Slimline envelope in white, and that is the card complete. So thank you so much for watching and spending time with me today, and until then, I will see you next time. Bye!